This is TWiT.
So our first guest manages IT for a private school, and he also writes for 9 to 5 Mac, and he recently wrote a piece about how HomeKit might be the answer to enterprise IoT woes.
Interesting.
So we got you to talk to Bradley Chambers. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Always glad to be back. And IoT is something I've been kind of passionate about for a while, specifically in the enterprise, because I've seen the pain points of it. And I was dealing with the pain points before I'd ever even heard that term IoT. And I'll give you a good little backstory. So I've been at my school since 2009. And when I came here, we had just gotten this commercial HVAC controller system. It was a $100,000 system, but it cut $5,000 a month off our power bill. And our building is 100,000 square feet, and it gave us the ability to heat and control certain rooms on a schedule or on demand. And obviously, saving $5,000 a month on a power bill, you can imagine what our power bill is in the summer. But the problem with it is, it's like the interface is absolutely garbage, and it was a Java-based system, and we're just now getting it upgraded to not be on Java. I mean, this is almost a decade later, and when I would examine the firewalls for this thing, I realized it was getting pinged from overseas all the time, because I've got to open up off-site so our folks can manage the HVAC remotely. And I've just become as we've studied IoT more, I've realized this is going to be a great thing for the enterprise, but it's also going to be terrible for the enterprise.
So we actually started off this episode talking about the fact that we want to figure out more, what does it mean IoT in the enterprise? And I feel like you kind of just answered it for us. It basically sounds like it's IoT at a larger scale. So instead of just my little townhouse in the burbs, it's a 100,000 square foot school, lots of children and teachers, all of whom would like to have a nice temperature to study in. And so I guess that's where IoT would be really efficient, and also to help save money, which, as we know, is very important in this day.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of things like paper towel holders in the restroom, where it can send a sensor to the maintenance staff, hey, this is 30% used, or this is 10%, has 10% left. Obviously, then things you don't even think about, CCTV systems. Those are IoT devices, and so I really think of IoT as anything that's on the network that's not an end user device, and that honestly is becoming more and more and more. The problem with it is the folks who are buying it are often not IT. And so like at our school, it's a lot of the facilities folks are buying it. So again, go back to the HVAC controller. And IT is just expected to, hey, get this stuff online. Like, I don't get to often talk to these folks ahead of time about the security. And the problem is a lot of these companies don't even know the security themselves. Like, they're maybe reselling something. And so this, like, all they know is like, this thing has a network port and they need an internal static IP address. And so it's like IT is like, what is this thing doing on my network? But you just got to make it work. And that's where I kind of thought about HomeKit for the enterprise, because we were in this boat in the home not too long ago, where there's no centralized platform. Everything is just a web server that you got to get on. No one knows what it's doing on your network. And now you've got HomeKit, you've got Google Assistant, you've got Amazon. You've got these platforms that these companies can build upon. So I feel confident as a consumer that, like, hey, I'm buying this stuff. It all works with HomeKit, but it also works with Google Assistant. So I could switch in the future. And I really think Apple could have an opportunity there. And they've got some partnerships with IBM and Cisco to build a HomeKit for the enterprise. Like, let's find a standardized platform that we can work with security. We can work on ease of access, and let's build that for the enterprise. And then as an IT person, if that was there, I could say to our facilities folks, hey, anything you buy, I'm not putting it on the network unless it's certified to work with HomeKit, because that's how I can trust the security. That's how I know what it's doing. And I think we're just at this spot where everybody wants it, but then we have this hodgepodge of protocols and ways to access.
So I think that HomeKit isn't necessarily known for the enterprise yet. There is no like work kit yet.
It's pretty new. It's pretty new to the market.
Well, HomeKit is new to the market, and slow to the market. Because Apple people will, like myself and you, will argue because they are making their products more secure and making sure everything works. But how hard of a sell do you think this will be for the enterprise?
Well, there's a lot of money to be made here, I think. And I think Apple's going to have to obviously come up with a WorkKit program, and then they're going to have to go to manufacturers and do the selling on their end. Like, hey, you build in WorkKit or HomeKit for the enterprise, and it's going to be easier to sell your products, because then you don't have to, IT doesn't have to worry about, what things are doing on the network. There's a level of control that Apple would provide. Again, if I have to put an Apple TV at every campus to allow it to work offsite, that's fine. That's obviously fine. So I don't know. Yeah, I think Apple, if they were committed to it, would have to go and sell to the Honeywells and the big players in the IoT industry. But I think there's a lot of money that could be had.
I think that's true. So Apple actually joined the Thread group last week, which I believe Google, and I mean that was the Qualcomm initiative, if I'm not mistaken. So what do you make of that? Why join in that? Is that just to add to the universality? I hope I said that word correctly.
It's hard to know Apple's motives there. Obviously, they're in the business of selling Macs and iPads and iPhones into the enterprise environment. And Apple probably doesn't get enough credit for how stable their devices are with enterprise Wi-Fi. I mean, people think that like your home Wi-Fi is similar to like enterprise Wi-Fi, and there are just so many more challenges in the enterprise. And I'll say the majority of problems like I see with enterprise networks with Wi-Fi have nothing to do with the network, but it's clients, and it's bad client drivers. It's outdated client drivers. And Apple does a good job here keeping their clients up to date, because regardless of what's wrong on the network or if it's a client problem, if the Wi-Fi doesn't work, people just assume it's a Wi-Fi problem. But in reality, it's always like a client problem. It's not even like it doesn't work, but maybe it doesn't roam, correctly. Again, in your home, you may have like a Google Wi-Fi system that has 3 access points. Roaming's not a problem. Well, in my building, I've got 45 because we have 100,000 square feet. So if I have roaming problems, that can be a big deal. But the clients control when they roam. And so, I don't know, Apple's motives here. Are they just wanting to be good players here and be good in the enterprise? Because obviously that's a big part of their business. But I'd like to think they have opportunities to do more. And because I do think that, in the next decade, I'll definitely have more non-end user devices on the network than I have actual end user devices. I mean, everything is coming on the network, whether it's water fountains, it's, again, paper towel dispensers. You could even do toilet paper dispensers. All that's going to go into the facilities group. It's going to make their lives easier and to make themselves smarter.
So it's almost like you need like an IT person for the facilities group.
IT for IoT?
Or they just have to be involved in that conversation. And again, that goes back to where a WorkKit program could be, could do well. Because if you said, hey, we're a our network is operated and we're suited for, WorkKit from Apple or HomeKit for the enterprise. Then you can go to, if there's a couple bids on HVAC controllers and they bring in IT to talk about it, it's like, well, if one supports WorkKit, that's one we're choosing, because that's what we use security-wise. And because it's like at some point these things are on the network and IT has to be involved in the discussion of the security of it, because just getting it on the network doesn't make it safe. You have to have a way to control it and to manage it and to see what it's doing. And ultimately, one of the big things with IoT is to upgrade it. A lot of this stuff was not built to be upgraded. We had multiple WPA2 vulnerabilities that last year that were patched and cracked by most people. But this IoT stuff, like, you don't always have a way to update it. And maybe there are no software updates. And we had somebody at our office say, hey, I wanted to add a little camera in my office for I'd seen some stuff missing. Would you have a problem if I put that on the guest Wi-Fi? And I said, what are you putting on there? They said the Arlo from Netgear. It's like, that's fine. I'm much more comfortable with like an Arlo camera from Netgear than I am a $30 camera that I have no idea what it's doing. It's running a little web server.
What about the Wise camera? Because it's only $25.
Have you heard of the Wise camera?
And apparently it's not that bad, because Stacey Higginbotham has put it on her list of certified.
But your point is that it's something known rather than something unknown.
Right. And I'm always fearful about what these things are doing on the network. Again, I can buy a device from Apple and I kind of have a good idea of what it's doing, but a random camera from Amazon, I don't always know. And I don't know where is it phoning home to? There is no little snitch app, that you have on the Mac for these little cameras to know, like, is this thing pinging another foreign country? What are these things doing? And that's the things I worry about with this gear. As we start putting more and more of it on the network, how do I know what it's doing? How do I know where it's talking to?
Especially in a school, right? Because you've got children, other people's children running around, and that's like a whole security and a whole ethics thing.
Right, absolutely,
sure.
Absolutely. You just want to, my big thing is I just want to know what devices are doing, and to be able to see what they're doing, and to see what they're accessing, and to see where they're being accessed from. And we're just at a place with IoT in the enterprise where I've not seen a centralized system, and that's ultimately what we need: a centralized system where, whether it's the HVAC controller, whether it's a thermometer, temperature, or thermostat, or whether it's a paper towel dispenser, I need a centralized platform that I can kind of guide our folks to buy under. And then it's easy to manage as well, and upgrade. These things, if they're on the Wi-Fi, let's say I go to change out, a pre-shared key. How hard are these things to get back online? It can be difficult.
I'm impressed that they asked you if they could put the camera on the network. You got them trained well.
Yeah.
Well, he had already done it.
He asked for forgiveness, not for permission.
And again, it wasn't Arlo, so I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the ideal thing, but again, it's better than a $20 one from Amazon where I have zero idea what it's doing. That's always my fear, is I just don't know what this stuff's doing, or where it's talking to.
I just think it's interesting that we're talking about IoT in the enterprise, but we are talking about essentially things that you can go to Walmart and Best Buy and buy off the shelves. And these are still, these things are enterprise quality. They're built so that you can DIY them to scale. And I'm really fascinated by the fact that, now I know when I'm writing articles, I'm not just writing to people in their homes. I'm also writing to people like you who are installing these things at a much larger scale.
Well, yeah, because it's one thing, like, let's say, let's go back to this camera example. It's one thing if he buys one camera, but if he says, hey, I want to put 30 of these around my office, or if like we have one paper towel dispenser that has the Wi-Fi built in, that's okay. That's fine. What happens when we have 50? How do you manage it? How do you update them? How do you control them? And like, I always think about things at scale, because there's a big difference in like how you do one thing versus how you do like a school-wide thing. And we had a teacher that was like, I was thinking about putting like a Google Assistant in my classroom, and I'm thinking, I don't need, like, how would that work if two people wanted to do that? Do they somehow see each other on the network? I don't know how that works. And again, it's when you're in your one classroom, that's fine. It's when you go to 30 or 40 classrooms that I start worrying, like, what are these things doing? How are they talking to each other? Does having multiple of them on the same network under different accounts, does that impact things at all? Again, I go back to, we need centralization and scalability on these devices.
What about cost, though? Because Apple is not known for low cost.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about the enterprise is cost is not always the determining factor. Again, we spent $100,000 on an HVAC controller to save $5,000 a month. It more than has paid for itself. And you go back to, again, like, let's say you could have these paper towel dispensers. Maybe they cost 20% more with the ones in Wi-Fi, but then you can show, hey, we were able to have one less person. If somebody leaves and retires, you don't have to replace them because you're not having to constantly check all the paper towel dispensers. You can know whether they need to be replaced or not. So that, there probably is cost with these things, but there could be some automation opportunities as well.
You could find out what kids are hanging out in the bathroom and playing, making paper towel stickies, which is when you get all the paper towels out and wet it and then throw it on the roof. Yeah, that's what I did in elementary school.
Where the long-term thing could be is, like, let's say you got iBeacons in the bathroom, and you could tell whose iPad was in there. That's there. Then it's like you could take your friend's iPad and get him in trouble. There's
right. Well, it's better than cameras in the bathroom, though.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, cameras are a big thing of centralization. Now obviously we've gone through like, RG6 cameras with a DVR and moved on to IP cameras, but now you're really seeing enterprise cameras with Wi-Fi built in as well. Wi-Fi technology has come to a spot to where, it can handle that bandwidth. Like, we've got a great enterprise network from Arrowhive Networks here, all 11 AC Wave 2. Our network can handle that kind of bandwidth where, 5-6 years ago, you wouldn't think about putting 1080p cameras on Wi-Fi, and now it's like, bring it on. Let's see what we can do with this thing.
I have to ask, so you mentioned Google, a Google Home being in a classroom. What are teachers use? I'm very curious. Are they using it to, like, teach? Do you know? Have you inquired?
I told her I wanted to think about it before we activated it. I just needed to think through how that worked. I mean, it's one thing when it's in your home and it's listening just you, but when it's like in your classroom listening, I told her I needed to like talk to our school leadership about that. But I imagine it could be things like starting timers. Teachers do that a lot, or just quick lookups. And I had, there's part of me that thinks like that could be a thing one day. It could be a teacher assistant.
That's why I'm very curious. I'm really into the idea, especially because Amazon and Google in particular are really designing these things to work with children and to interact with children. So.
Yeah, I had an article for 9 to 5 Mac maybe a month or so ago about, could HomePod have a place in the classroom? I mean, obviously it needs to be lower cost, but I'm not ready to say yes, but I need to have a long view of technology. Yeah, maybe next year, but probably not. But like in 10 years, could that be a really good kind of teacher assistant to be able to, students ask questions to, start timers, even things like, hey cylinder, mark everybody as present here today. Just things like that teachers now have to open up their computer and mark everybody as present in the system. Maybe a future Google Home or Amazon or a HomePod has hooks into your school's management system, and you can do your attendance from there. Or again, you go back to hey cylinder, call the school office and tell them so and so sick, and that triggers a whole sort of I mean there's a lot of opportunities there. But yeah, we'll see the long game on that and who wins. I think the key is going to be low cost. I think Amazon and Google have the right idea with $50 devices, because I think anything more than that, then you've just priced yourself out of the game.
That are constantly being tossed out for free with every purchase of a new
Again, it goes back to, if I'm in IT, I want to be able to centrally manage all those Alexas. And I want to be able to, deploy those. And, Apple's done that with Apple TV, where you can centrally manage your those devices through your MDM, like we use Jamf here at school, and you can enroll those in them just like you can iOS. So I can push out configurations to them. Like we have our lobby signage running off of Apple TVs here, and it's a web-based interface with a company called KitCast, and it's just an app on the Apple TVs. And you start it up, and it starts playing the slides. But yeah, you can easily manage all your Apple TVs through your MDM. Now, I think that was like iOS 11 is when that came out.
Well, your school is so lucky to have you.
I want to go to your school. I imagine also being a teacher there is fun because you don't have to deal with, I would like to not deal with a laptop. I mean, it would be great to just have a little voice interface in the classroom that you can interact with. That way you can keep your eye on the kids.
That's true. Yeah, it's funny. I always think about like what's the future of like computing in the classroom, and I really think everybody talks about like Chromebooks versus iPads. Is it the tablet versus the laptop? Honestly, I think the future should be either. I think what I really want is I want to carry my phone, and I want to have like a docking station next to a big monitor, and I walk into my office and I dock it next to that, and then I want like Mac OS. And then when I go home, I want a tablet that I dock my phone into, and it becomes an iPad. Like I want one device that can be multiple form factors. And I think that's honestly what teachers want, because there are times like an iPad is better, and there are times a laptop form factor is better. It's like, why do we have to, like, I wonder if in like 20 years we'll look back in the fact that we carried 3 devices and like laugh at that in a way. It's just the same way like we laughed about carrying a cell phone, a digital camera, and an MP3 player. Like, these should just all be like, my phone is more powerful than the computer I had like 5 years ago. So what does the next 10 years bring?
Wow, I am like so excited to see this. Thank you for ramping up our excitement. I'm super into it because back when the iPad came out, there was a big discussion around it being used in schools, and so now that I've taken it in, we've taken in this interest in IoT. Now I'm like super fascinated how this is going to propagate outside of the home.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's really fascinating, and those kids sound like they're gonna have some fun in their education.
Well, I'll say one thing to wrap up that thing about the iPad, and I'll tell you where the iPad still struggles. And I've seen this after being an iPad user since day one. We've had them in our school since day one. I manage hundreds of them. The single biggest problem with the iPad versus the laptop is 2 things. Number one, it is not great ergonomically to sit in front of an iPad for 6 hours at a time, like if you're a desk worker. Number 2, the iPad needs a trackpad with a cursor. That is, I think, fundamentally where I still struggle, especially with web-based interfaces. There are things that are just like, let's say, for example, I wanted to update our school website. I could do that on an iPad. It takes about 4 times as long. But if I had a cursor on the iPad, it's a breeze. And I think it goes back to, we need the full version of Safari on the iPad and not the mobile version. I need trackpad support on the iPad. And if I had that with a cursor, adios Mac OS for me.